I've been interested in history since I was a little kid, but I'll admit, most of it can be a little dry sometimes. We've all been bored to tears by one thing or another while forced to go through required history curriculum. But every so often, you come across a story that feels like a roller coaster. Today I want to talk about something called the cat organ, a topic that feels more like an urban legend than something that has a Wikipedia page. The quote-unquote instrument would have been made by placing cats in a row, arranged based on the tone of their meows. When a key was played, their tails would be whacked, prompting them to cry out their assigned note. The animal lover in me was dismayed, but fortunately there's no record of anything like this ever being built. It's only a conjectural instrument used in literature and art to illustrate various points. You want to know why that is? The cat organ is impractical at best. The idea that people had proposed literally hurting cats before, even if it was conjectural or a joke or what have you, that just got my head spinning. This thing, this stupid contraption, it's something that I was determined to get to the bottom of. I had to know everything about it. Needless to say, things got strange quickly, but also fascinating in an odd way. So, join me on my path of research. This is the cat organ, and boy does it only go sideways from here. The first widely accepted source that displays the cat organ, although there are some earlier accounts with a rat or two, was from a Jesuit polymath of all people. However, to say he was representative of all Jesuits would probably get me excommunicated. His name was Anastasius Kircher, and he's commonly described as Leonardo da Vinci with a streak for the bizarre. In 1650, he published a book called Musicurgia Universalis, or Universal Music in English. The idea was to make a comprehensive history of musical inventions up to that point. Buried in the text, he spins this yarn, which I've crudely paraphrased. So there's this bummed-out prince. Maybe he couldn't divorce his wife and was jealous of Henry VIII or something. It doesn't matter. This talented actor comes in and makes this funky little contraption. He takes some cats, he arranges them in a certain order, and he plays them like a piano. This invention was so uproarious and hilarious that it knocked the prince out of his depression immediately. Aside from the everything about this tale, it's interesting to note that one of Kircher's assistants provided us with what is most likely our first sole illustration of the cat organ. The only real thing to note about the drawing is how scuffed the cat's faces are. Some of them just look more human than cats. I don't know if Kircher's assistant was just shit at drawing, but all I'm saying is that I wouldn't be surprised if any of these gremlins represented my mood on a given day. Our next source comes from Johann Christian Riehl. Oversimplifying for the sake of time, he was an insanely influential figure in early psychiatry, even coining the term psychiatry. He believed that understanding a patient's mood was essential to treating them, which led to some, shall we say, interesting results. In a book he wrote about how to treat mental breakdowns, he recommends the following. In order to treat someone who is inattentive, you should slap a cat organ in front of them. If you force them to see and listen to a piece played on it, their inattentiveness would inevitably be cured. This is because the contraption is so insane and obtuse that it should shock people back to reality. So we've gone from Kircher's treatment of depression to Riehl's treatment of ADHD in a little over 150 years. Lovely. Fortunately, this is probably a joke treatment. It bears a striking resemblance to Kircher's description of shocking someone from their depression. If this wasn't an illusion, I'd be very perplexed as to why it is the first real source of the paper trail since Kircher's book way back in 1650. Regardless, we have another source documenting the cat organ, rather than zero, which I can't tell if that's a good thing or not. Between some of the bigger sources, there are two illustrations that may or may not be legitimate, seeing I couldn't find anything linking them back to a reputable source. Wikipedia says this image in the German newspaper, apologies if I butcher any of these names, Die Gartenlaube, dates back to 1858. If legitimate, Wikipedia says that Die Gartenlaube was meant to, quote-unquote, enlighten the whole family. The only enlightening part about any of this has been seeing how truly spectacular human stupidity can get. The other image that confused me in the same way was, oddly enough, the cover page for the Wikipedia article on the cat organ. The very same article that sent me down this rabbit hole. Wikimedia Commons tells me that this image comes from La Nature, a French science magazine. If there's anything scientific about this image, please tell me. I would have paid a lot more attention to biology. Jean-Baptiste Weckerlin, please God, let me not screw up any more French names, a French opera writer, wrote a book about bizarre musical inventions, kind of similar to Kircher's in a lot of ways. Again, I've badly paraphrased the passage in which the organ appears. So there's this Habsburg prince called Philippe II, right? He's visiting his father in 1540-something, and they meet at a procession in Brussels. There's a whole bunch of miscellaneous animal cruelty, criticizing the opulence and callous nature of the royalty. What you'd expect to see in a topic as messed up as this. Given that where Weckerlin lived was being occupied by German forces, and at the time Germany was a monarchy, it would make sense that you would have a bone to pick with the royalty. Especially considering, France's tender history with its monarchs. Anyway, so we get to the end of the procession, where I'm just going to read verbatim from the English translation. Quote, "A bear played the organ. Instead of pipes, there were 16 cat heads, each with its body confined. The tails were sticking out and were held to be played as the strings on a piano. The corresponding tail would be pulled hard, and it would produce each time a lamentable meow. The historian Juan Cristobal Cavate noted that the cats were arranged properly to produce a succession of notes from the octave. Chromatically, I think." Unquote. The source is fiction, if you couldn't tell. It's just a literary exercise to illustrate the cruelty of the royalty for whatever bone Weckerlin had to pick. I think that aside from the complete insanity about everything in this excerpt, the strangest part has to be the chromatically, I think, part. Chromatic essentially just means that the notes are in order. If the notes aren't in order on an organ, they done f***ed up. If that's the case, I think I'd be insulted, quite frankly. You don't go through all that effort and barbarity to get cats to make shitty music by yanking on their tails and then screw up how you make a piano. If for some ungodly reason you're still watching this video and are a bit uncomfortable with the substance of it, treat yourself better by watching content made by somebody whose brain doesn't have the same consistency as overcooked mac and cheese. This, right here, this is your chance to get off the ride. After this point, you're going to witness the depths of human stupidity to such a great extent, I don't think you'll be able to come out the other side the same person. There's a soda shop and ice cream parlor across the block. Go get yourself something nice. Alright, now, for everyone still here, this image is a direct precursor to Nazi policy in Czechoslovakia. I can prove it. Now, in order to understand the slop around this cartoon, you need to know a little bit about this guy right over here and what he did. This is a caricature of a man called Count Bedini. At the time, Bedini was one of the highest-ranking men in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When he got his fancy new job, nationalism across Europe was higher than your average Woodstock attendee. For the layman, it's a philosophy that goes like this. I'm superior! How can you prove it? I thought I was superior. Well, I can still beat the shit out of you. Well, I still think I'm superior. Long and short of it, everybody was at everybody's throats, trying to gain the most influence for whatever nationality they claimed to be a part of. Bedini didn't much care for this philosophy. He was loyal to the empire and wanted to reform it for the better. In one particular example, Bedini advised Emperor Franz Joseph I to stop the appointment of anti-Semitic German nationalist Karl Lueger as mayor of Vienna. He did this 3 times. In the modern-day Czech Republic, ethnic Germans, in red, and ethnic Czechs, in blue, were fighting over whose language was superior. Standard nationalist shit. Bedini, for his part, made German and Czech required languages to participate in government in the region of the Czech Republic. Seems reasonable, until you consider the fact that most Czechs were already fluent in German because they had to learn it in school. Most Germans, on the other hand, had no experience with Czech. If you couldn't understand both of the languages, you couldn't become an administrator, which effectively barred a huge part of the German populace from participating in government. What started as an uproar from German minority parties quickly spiraled into a legislative body becoming dissolved, deputies being expelled, the whole thing. If you looked up clusterfuck in the dictionary, well, first of all, you get a picture of Washington. But then you'd probably get into what our cartoon is depicting, which I think should finally make some limited amount of sense. According to Wikipedia, only the most reputable of sources on this show, the bottom inscription reads, quote, Count Bedini, the curious gentleman, revised the invention of the cat organ, and thus achieves a great success. So, this conservative publication is implying that Bedini is torturing the Empire because he introduced a crappy piece of language legislation. Brilliant. Bedini was kicked out of his position just a couple of weeks after that cartoon was published. That leaves us with two questions. How does this connect to the claim about Nazis I made at the beginning of this section? And was the German language dispute from earlier solved? I can answer both questions by reintroducing you to one very unpleasant person. Karl Lueger, who had violently opposed Bedini's language reforms, became mayor of Vienna after running unopposed from Bedini's influence. He was still in office by 1908 when a young failed artist moved to Vienna, and witnessing Lueger's power and policy, later going on to praise him in Mein Kampf. After coming to power himself, Hitler still had an axe to grind with the Czechs, especially with quote-unquote helping the German minority that inspired so much strife for Bedini. He wanted the land, the Sudetenland that the ethnic Germans occupied for Germany, and Germany alone. He occupied it, and 6 months afterwards, World War II broke out. Speaking of segues, I hope you like Whiplash, because from here, it's only lighthearted dumb things. Well, about as lighthearted as a subject like this can get. In the second episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus, Terry Jones whips out the mouse organ. The only thing worth noting is that Terry Jones says that one of the mice is tuned to the pitch of E sharp, which is not a thing. But whatever, you can't always get what you wish for. I'm not sure exactly how to introduce this one because I feel like it kind of speaks for itself. Someone made a keyboard out of cat plushies, played Somewhere Over the Rainbow on it, King Charles laughs like a dying whale. Roll credits, I hate my job. In all seriousness, this one just feels like a bizarre full circle moment. We went from Weckerlin completely digging into the royalty to Charles laughing at something completely harmless. As much as I despise royal tabloids, this one is pretty tame. Just an old man laughing at silly cats. Jesus, I need some rest.